All right, I think we are on. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Children of the Beast Creature Workshop. Today we're going to be working on going through the template system that I'm putting in the game that is supposed to make it so you can have creatures that you could develop so fast you could theoretically do it like in the same like you need a creature for something, bam, you just bring up these pages and you'll be able to have something that you can mess with and use as quickly as possible. And so the reason I want to do this is because um, creatures in the game are rather complex. um, and so I want there to be a way for people to simply make up creatures in the middle of a game without having to have had preparation beforehand. Especially because I want to make it as easy as possible for people to have a more improvisational mindset um, than one where they have to prepare everything. Um, and so yeah, what I have got here um, is my currently in progress template system. It still needs more work. It's missing a few things that I can't quite put my finger on besides just more stuff that I want to put in here. But the idea is that it's these two pages, right? And these two pages are essentially selections that you make when you have a creature. So, say your party like messes with a mysterious mudwell or something like that that you didn't intend people to mess with, but all of a sudden people are poking at it and doing whatever, and so you want some sort of mud creature to pop out. And so you go over to this page, and what you do is first you select the one of the bodies we have. We currently have four bodies in here. Depending on how things go, I'm wanting at least six. Um, More than that, and it starts getting a little cluttered. But um, so you choose a body of like what kind of thing this would be. In this case, a mud creature. I could see it being like either a weak body or a swift body. For the sake of this, I like the idea of like a swift little mud creature. So in the middle of the game, I will just select swift body. And so it will have these stats. And if you notice down here that there's a bunch of stats separated by commas, that's because oh, it forgot to put in a couple. Um, that's because these stats are of the different tiers of difficulty or tiers of intensity within the game. And so there's tier 1, 2, 3, and X. Oh, excuse me. And so when you go through these, you'll see like base willpower, 10, which is tier 1, 30 is tier 2, 40 is tier 3, and 60 is tier X. So that, depending on what tier of difficulty your hunters are in, or just what you want to make at the time, you can easily tune it to what you need it. And so each of these, so the swift body, the idea is that whatever creature that you just came up with, it is fast and fragile. And so it has an average amount of health, but low armor, high instinct, which means its turns, it often goes first, and it has high evasion, which I'll just, oh, right. This isn't the editable form. Um, so it's very hard to hit, but when you do, it has very low armor, and so it breaks super easily. Then in these, you have your armor values, but the resistances and weaknesses the creature has. So resistances, this is kind of an interesting part, and one I'm curious if I'll find an alternative for. But there's no way for me as the designer to know what exactly whatever random creature you're coming up with is resistant or weak to. So in this case, just a general guideline of choose up to two resistances. It's not a strict thing. Technically, you can do whatever. It's your game. But I think it's helpful to have confident guidelines that say like this is what you should do for the most part. Like, and if you're gonna mess with things, then you're gonna mess with things. It don't matter what the rules say. And then for weaknesses, this is a simplification of the kind of things we do for creatures, but it's true. Uh, so for weaknesses, if the creature is tier 1 or tier 2, you choose up to 2 weaknesses. If the creature is tier 3 or X, only weak points have any weaknesses. Um, and this is a simplification because it actually has grades throughout tier 1, 2, 3, and X normally. But it's fine for this purpose. Um, and what this does is the idea is as people start the game, they are going to have to figure out how to exploit different um, different flaws within the creature. So if it has low evasion, there are attacks that benefit from uh, there are attacks that can benefit from a creature with low evasion. For example, the way critical hits work um, is they when you critically hit, you get bonus damage depending on how much you rolled above their evasion. And so there are builds that you can make or certain weapons that critically hit more often to give you access to that bonus damage. And so creatures with low evasion are more vulnerable to that type of bonus damage or other effects that might benefit from having a creature with low evasion. Um, and so the thing is that in the beginning of the game, I like having creatures with a lot of general weaknesses, not just damage weaknesses, but other things that can be taken advantage of, because it's supposed to be uh, your the goal of the game is you're supposed to get in an attitude of figuring out the situation you're in and improvising whatever you can to take advantage of the situation. And when you have creatures at the start that have a lot of different weaknesses, it's not saying that players will necessarily take advantage of all of them because they probably won't even know all of them. It just gives a higher chance that they will find at least one, and finding at least one will, you know, will encourage you to use it and hopefully be able to take advantage of that in a cool way. Um, because otherwise, if you don't take advantage of any of the creature's weaknesses and just fight it straight, you're going to be having a much harder time, and a lot of players may not even survive. Um, but that is the point of the game, is you're supposed to be exploring this space both in a literal sense of exploring the world and everything, and like a mechanical sense of when you encounter these creatures and have fights, you need to figure stuff out as best as you can. I say in the book, and I probably mentioned it in the past, that I like to think of a good exploration type adventure to be sort of like an episode of Star Trek or perhaps X Files, where the characters encounter a problem that often seems like ridiculous or insurmountable, and through experimenting, prodding at it, trying out crazy ideas, they get closer and closer to finding an actual solution that helps them out. It's a lot of people may think of that as kind of like a puzzle design. And I don't want that to be the intent. It's not supposed to be that you are searching for the one solution that will solve everything. It's that this is a role playing game. You are engaged in this uh, it's a fairly simulationist game, so you're engaged in this simulation of a world, and so how is your character within this world going to do whatever it takes to overcome the situation? And that should be an open-ended question with open-ended answers. Um, anyway, so I get sidetracked a lot, but um, so the point is of this weaknesses thing of if tier 3 or X only weak points have any weaknesses, is that as players get better and stronger at the game, we want it to still, we want the difficulty of finding weaknesses, whether they be damage weaknesses or otherwise, to also increase so that the challenge as people become more comfortable with the game continues to go up and still be fun. Um, especially as people get crazier abilities, because at the start, if something has a weakness to electricity, you may not have easy access to electricity and have to come up with some way to do any kind of electrical thing to it if you want to take advantage of that weakness. But as you progress through the game, it will be increasingly likely that your characters, in some way, whether it be their weapons or special abilities, will just have access to electric damage and like all the time, or at least most of the time. And so and although that's cool, we still want to encourage, okay, so you have this power now. You can take on these lower level creatures without nearly as much trouble, but you're still going to have to like really try and learn and um, improvise whatever you can to encounter the deepest and darkest monsters of the game. Um, so yeah, and then we've got movement speed. So like Swift Body has 40 feet movement speed, and similar to choosing your damage, resistance, and weaknesses, you choose at least one full movement type, um, and you can choose any amount of half movement types. That doesn't matter as much. If you make your thing able to, fly and swim and climb and dig, like good for you. You'll probably I would say that likely it will be a bit unfocused of a creature if it can do everything, but it likely won't destroy things if you have a bunch of movement types. So just, in general, you're probably going to be choosing the ground movement type unless you've got a special idea for like a dragon or bird kind of thing flying through the sky. Or, with our example of a mudman type of thing, um, it might burrow and do something with that. Um, so yeah, then after you have selected the bodies, um, that gives you the base stats that you need for everything. Um, and then when you're actually in combat, there are a variety of attacks you can choose from. They don't have a damage type associated with any of their damages because, you make that up. If it's a mud person, I'd say it's likely for them to have like bludgeoning as it splaps against you, or maybe it's like some sort of weird decrepit mud that maybe melts your skin off and does like acid or blight damage or something. Um, and then so if you look through these, we've got, they're titled around like what they focus around. So we've got a basic attack. Basic attack requires just an action. In the game, you have two actions during the game, and this is what weak point it is associated with. So in this case, it is a quote unquote average weak point, which means that like it's probably something fairly normal, like a claw or a mouth or something like that. Um, and likely that weak point does other things. Um, and so, yeah. And then we have got, if it is melee or ranged, how much reach or range it can have. This is an interesting thing that I want to see if I can come up with an alternate solution to, just because reach tends to be a thing that scales over time. So early game creatures don't tend to have as many melee attacks that have a reach, whereas later game creatures tend to have longer reach. But I feel a little uncomfortable just saying, oh, tier one has, adjacent reach, tier two has 10-foot reach, tier three has 15-foot reach. It feels a little reductive, but I may just have to live with that. Um, and then for range, if it's ranged, it has 100 feet of range, but you subtract 5 damage. Um, in all honesty, you can probably get away with designing creatures that don't have a penalty to their ranged attacks. Just simply if you understand like what the point of the ranged attack is and the context of the whole fight and everything. But for the sake of this, of having simple creatures that you just quickly select things for and just have easily lookupable charts of what they can do, then uh, I feel that there needed to be a distinction between melee attacks and ranged attacks in this quick selection style, and in that case, ranged loses 5 damage. Um, and then we have accuracy. Each of these little hexagons is a 20-sided dice because the game uses multiple 20-sided dice. And then finally we have damage, which says like base plus 5, base plus 15 for the different tiers. A thing to note is that even with like base willpower and blood back here, um, is that creatures have essentially different. It says intensity here, although I think I'm going to be changing that terminology. But they kind of have uh, life cycles. And so usually minions are kind of like the baby form of a creature. Creature is kind of a standard, and then boss and mega boss are like, bigger and more gnarly versions for whatever reason. Um, and in this case, minions in general have just one of everything. So don't matter what base willpower or blood say, they have one health. They are designed to be one-shot things that are swarms that can be easily dispatched. Creature has 1 times base, so if you have the swift body with 10 base willpower, it will have 10 willpower, and the 5 base blood is 5 blood, so 10 willpower and 5 blood. And then boss and mega boss multiply it by 2 and 3 respectively. In general, I wanted to make this fairly intuitive, so minion is 1, creature is 1 times, boss is 2 times, and mega boss is 3 times, just in general. Technically, the harvest rewards change not based on that 1, 2, 3 times thing, but it's not the end of the world, especially since it's not something that comes up in the middle of combat where your brain power is going to be the most taxed. Um, and so in this case, if we were fighting a mud creature, I would have to decide whether it was a minion creature, boss, or mega boss creature. If this was just some regular old mud well that they got this creature from, it wasn't especially cursed or anything like that, I might say it is a normal mud creature. But if it was an especially large one, maybe it was sacred, it had like a whole bunch of like religious artifacts and everything all over it, or who knows what, eyeballs, then I might say this is like a boss mud creature that came out. And in that case, if this was tier 1, I would say this has 2d6 plus 5 tier 1 damage. So, and it does blight damage as it rots away your skin from its very touch. Oh, so terrible. But these are basic attacks. Heavy strikes are like the big hits. They don't have any like special abilities or anything like that. Um, but they use a special action, which you can only perform once per turn. You may have 2 actions, but only one of them can ever be a special action. Um, and it does big damage. Has a little bit less accuracy. Um, but yeah, it does like 10 more damage in general than average. At higher tiers, it even goes higher than that. And that it, it's it's just a big hit. Like, got to avoid it somehow. Usually, people avoid these kinds of attacks if they have a high evasion character. Otherwise, people have to come up with other methods or just try to find ways to mitigate the damage, or just tank it. Then we have Status Strike, which is an example attack that gets someone to suffer a status effect. Multi Strike, which is kind of like there's an example creature we have where it's like a Hydra, and the Hydra has a bunch of heads. And so, if you wanted that kind of Hydra-like creature, or something with just a bunch of tentacles or something like that, to just slap the same person up a bunch, multi-strike might be an interesting way to do that. As the way they work in this example is they all use 1 dice, so it will attack like 5 times or something like that. You roll 5 dice, and You roll 5 dice all at the same time, um, and just see which ones hit, and then each of them deals damage as a separate attack. Oops. Um, then we have the sweeping strike, which is basically a multi-target attack. So it will hit everybody within its range. So like if it's a big sweep in front of it, like everything within 15 feet of the creature, like uh, is targeted, and it makes an accuracy roll that is tested against uh, every person's evasion, but only one accuracy roll. A lot of things done just to make like the actual process of calculating everything a little bit simpler. And then we have different kinds of area attacks, like a spray that's forward, a burst from the body that surrounds it, a ranged bomb that it launches some kind of blast in some distance, like a D&D fireball kind of situation that explodes in a radius. And then sensory assault is kind of an interesting one where it targets everything that has a kind of sense and that can sense it. So if it was like some sort of scream or something by the creature, so that everything that can hear it suffers damage or some sort of nasty effect or something like that, that's the way you do it. Um, and so all of these can be used just base, or you can modify them as you like, because most creatures will have special abilities and special effects that might modify these attacks or whatever it does. But hopefully it should provide like some sort of base for you to work with, and something that can be done fairly quickly too. Um, so that if we had I realize I've been talking for a while, but in this example where we have this mudman, I would open up these 2 pages and like I need to come up with a mudman. I've got to select its body. It's going to be swift. It's a big mudman, so I guess it'll be a boss. And okay, so I know that it's a boss mudman. All right, combat start. And then combat starts. People people fight it. It's the Mudman's turn. It's like, okay, what does a Mudman do? Okay, I am going to have it do a big ol' mud punch, and so just have it do a heavy strike, and like maybe while you're in the middle of it, you go, okay, everybody like make a defense roll to see if like you get mud splattered all over you, which might do something. Um, and that's not written in here. Like I said, it's about the ability. You can add stuff to it if you need to, but it should provide a base. Uh, and yeah, that it, so anytime you're thinking about like creating a creature on the fly, this should be fairly easy to do. Um, and then we have this little general stats box at the bottom, which is very rarely relevant. People aren't necessarily going to talk to every creature that they come across, especially because languages are not a default part of the game. You have to discover different languages. But, it's here in case you need it, and it provides a guideline for creating your languages. A very simple one, but nonetheless. Its goal is not to be a way to comprehensively create a wholly unique creature. Uh, in that case, follow the full-on creature creation instructions and everything. But yeah. So, and then we have the guidelines to basic weak points and everything, which is found on pretty much every creature page in the game, but it's also useful here. Yeah, and that is basically this system. It's There are a couple things I still want to do with it. Like I said, I want to add like 2 more bodies. I'm still wondering whether this weak body thing is an interesting idea or not. I'm not entirely sure because the weak body is basically it. It's got crappy stats. And it says fragile form for creatures with ridiculous abilities. The idea being is that it's for creatures that have abilities so strong that their base stats should just be poop. Um, and some people might find that interesting. I don't know if it's as generally useful as I would like, but we'll see. I kind of want to create like a big brain body, that has a lot of mental oriented stuff, and maybe some other things. But a thing I personally have to keep in mind, which is an interesting psychological fact, is that people have a difficult time making choices when, at least in a short span of time, a difficult time making choices when there are more than roughly five or six. It doesn't mean it's impossible. Um, just that that's kind of the sweet spot. So that, for example, if you imagined this as having, instead of five attacks here and four attacks here, we instead had a list of like 30 different attacks you could choose from. Uh, that could be useful for a that could be useful for a creature creation system in which you prep beforehand so that you read everything and really go in depth with it. But since this is about making quick decisions, um, quick decisions that will help your own improvising with improvising new creatures, limiting the amount of attacks is really important for that. And you'd be surprised how often that number for choices actually makes a difference in a lot of games. Some games don't care, especially the ones that want you to, like, some board games or something that want you to sit there for ages and ages mulling over a billion different things. But I tend to find that even the best brain burny type games, they categorize their choices so that within each category there's only going to be a maximum of maybe six. You can even think about that in terms of like a hand of cards or something like that when in a card game. Very rarely do card games go much beyond six cards in your hand, uh, as a base, because if you've got some sort of hand to draw a deck, then, whatever. But yeah, and so that is what we've got here. Uh, like, there's not really much else to go over, and I don't see anyone in the chat. So I'll just end it here for now. On future broadcasts, I'll go over different aspects of creature creation, and if it's just a boring week, just, you know make some creatures, because I have a big list of creatures that I need to finish up. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And thanks you guys for watching. And have a good night, y'all.